Hello, Giants fans, and welcome to your Valentine's Views podcast for Monday. If you're watching us on YouTube, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you're listening on Big Blue View Radio, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm joined today by Patricia Traina of Giants Country and Locked On Giants, good friend here to talk about Giants free agency, the draft, and all that good stuff. Patty, how you doing?
Hanging in, Ed. It was a busy first week of free agency. Exciting, a lot to talk about, and still a lot of stuff coming up that I'm sure we'll be talking about over the coming weeks.
Absolutely. It's almost a little bit of a take your, kind of catch your breath time a little bit right now, but still a lot coming down the pipe, and a lot of draft stuff to talk about. On my show, I've had Tony Del Genio and Nick Filato on after some of the big moves that the Giants made last week, to kind of break those things down, give some perspective on those things. And what I kind of want to do today is sort of take inventory of where the Giants are and where they want to go, or where they need to go going forward. And when you look at what they've done, Patty, and what they haven't done as of yet, they made some big moves. Darren Waller, Bobby Okereke, bringing in Paris Campbell. They've done some interesting things, and things that should help them. But when you look at it, when you look at the Giants as of today, what haven't they done yet in your mind that you think they need to do?
Offensive line. Got to address the interior of the offensive line. They lost Nick Gates. They don't have John Feliciano signed as of this recording. Really, the only center with experience I think they have on the roster, if I'm not mistaken, is Ben Bredeson, who is under contract. You've got to address that offensive line, and ideally that center position. Because, look, you've got two young tackles who are currently on their rookie contract. You've got potentially, if Josh Shizudu or Marcus McKeithen can somehow win starting jobs, they're on their rookie contracts. Then if you add a center on a rookie contract, now you've got a good young line and the chance to have some continuity, which is so hard to do in the NFL when it comes to offensive lines. I mean, every year it seems like some teams just keep turning over spots on their offensive line. How about some continuity? We go back and we look at the Giants of 2007 through 2010. They had continuity, and they were a pretty good line. And they were a brick wall for Eli Manning. Well, doesn't Daniel Jones deserve the same type of brick wall? I mean, they just invested 4 years, $160 million in him. So why not give him the protection of a good, solid line that's going to be together for a while?
Absolutely, Patty. And the one question that I have, or the one surprising thing to me, I suppose at this point, I always knew that it was really going to be a choice for the Giants between Nick Gates and John Feliciano in terms of bringing one back. I never expected both to be back. And, Gates moved on to Washington. The Giants were never going to pay him 3 years and $16.5 million. That just wasn't going to happen. But I'm a little bit surprised at this point that they haven't re-upped with John Feliciano yet. Are you a little bit surprised by that as well?
Yes and no. I think they will eventually, but I think they had some other priorities they wanted to address. So I do think Feliciano will be back. I don't think it'll be more than a 1-year deal, but they wanted to address some of these other needs. They added to the receiver core. They added to the defensive line, and it looks like they're trying to continue to add to the defensive line with, Ashawn Robinson, who's coming in on Monday, or is reportedly coming in on Monday. They added to the linebacker group, with Bobby Okereke. So I'm not stunned that Feliciano isn't back, but I do think they will look to add a veteran center, whether it be him or if somebody shakes loose, maybe they look to, bring him in. And I would love to see them take a center in the draft. I really would. If there's one sitting there, shoot, grab them. I mean, you'd have a young offensive core and a brick wall for Daniel Jones to function behind, and that's something he just hasn't had.
Absolutely, Patty. And it's been a long time since the Giants had a center who was more than basically who ended up as more than a 1 year fill-in, a 1 year stopgap. It's
Yeah.
been a long time, and you simply can't build a solid offensive line, one that, as you said, has continuity, one that, from year to year, you know what you're going to get. You can't do that when you don't know who's going to be snapping the ball. You just can't.
Right. And there's such a thing as chemistry between the quarterback and the center. If you think back to when Sean O'Hara was here and Eli Manning was the quarterback, how many times did we hear Sean O'Hara say over the course of a season, Eli and I practiced snapping the ball 1,000 times? And did they have very many botched snaps between them? I can't think of the whole lot off the top of my head. So it is so important. And then the other thing is in the protection calls. If the center's making the protection calls, he's got to be seeing what the quarterback is seeing. So that chemistry and being on the same page, so important. And how do you get that if you keep turning over the center spot every year?
Absolutely. So, Patty, the other thing, when I look at what hasn't been done, really, the Giants lost Julian Love, and we can talk about why and whether we're surprised or not. I'm personally not surprised that Julian Love moved on, but when I look at needs, things that the Giants need to do, I think that defensive secondary, particularly cornerback, but maybe even safety, if there's somebody there, at 57 or even 25 or whatever, if there's somebody out there that they really like, I still feel like cornerback, especially for Wink Martindale, because I said this at Big Blue View the other day, and I honestly believe this. The Giants drafted at number 5 a year ago, and they drafted Kayvon Thibodeau, and no one is going to complain about having Kayvon Thibodeau because he's a heck of a player. But I will always believe they would have drafted Sauce Gardner at number 5 if the Jets hadn't gotten there first at number 4. Wink Martindale says all the time that cornerback is so important to his defense. In fact, a year ago, I think he admitted cornerback is more important than pass rusher.
Yeah.
Because of the pressure he puts on those guys. So I look at corner, and I don't expect the Giants to go spend money, a ton of money, but I would expect them to address cornerback fairly highly in the draft. I don't know. How do you see that?
I agree. I could see it possibly being in the first round because this is a deep quarterback class. But I think if the center is there, like I'm a big Schmitz fan, John Michael Schmitz, love the guy. If he's sitting there at 25, I don't see him getting to the Giants in the second round. I think at 57, where they draft in the second round. So do I see a potential for a quarterback at 57? Yes. And you're absolutely right. I mean, right now, the Giants have Adoree Jackson as their number 1 cornerback. And this is a guy who I think this is the last year of his contract. He has a voidable year after this year. So who knows if he's going to be extended. You have, a couple of young guys. You've got Cordell Flott, who didn't look horrible, but, there's still some questions about him because he did miss some time. Aaron Robinson, who can't stay on the field. Darnay Holmes, who it just seems like every year they want to draft over him. They need to add to that position, I think, because, they have quantity, but whether they have quality, I think you can make a case that maybe they don't have what they need just yet.
Absolutely. So that wouldn't surprise me at all. Patty, what I want to talk about a little bit, I want to talk about what the Giants have done over the last week and what we've seen in the marketplace and the impact on a couple of Giants in particular. We know that on Monday, as you mentioned, the Giants reportedly are bringing in Sean Robinson for a visit, defensive tackle, played the last 3 years for the Rams. They signed Rakeem Nunez-Roches, Nacho, as he wants to be called, run-stopping defensive tackle. It's obviously a position that they are prioritizing. But there's there's and we keep we keep waiting for a Leonard Williams contract extension, but there's a little nagging voice in the back of my head that keeps wondering, the more guys they bring in, and if you look at the draft, there's a possibility of a couple defensive tackles that might be interesting at 25 as well. Brian Bressie is one of those guys, but there's a little nagging voice in the back of my head saying, if they bring in enough guys, they might move on from Leonard Williams this offseason. I don't know what's your thought on what you think might happen here with Williams?
Wow. You can't rule that out. 32 million is Williams's cap hit, but see, there's two things with Williams, which I take into consideration as why I'm not surprised something hasn't been done there yet. Number one, he's coming off of a neck issue that bothered him down the stretch. So I know I have said in the case with Xavier McKinney, and people say, oh, the Giants got to extend him. I say, no, they got to see how McKinney goes through with his rehab on that hand. And if he can get that hand, up to snuff. Well, I think the same argument can be made with Leonard Williams. Is he going to be okay moving forward? I mean, we don't know where he is health-wise. I think everybody's optimistic that he'll be okay, but we don't know publicly where they stand. The other issue is that Williams is going to be 29, if I'm not mistaken. He's had injuries over the last couple of years, and we're talking about a contract extension, not a restructure. With a restructure, those are a lot easier to do because a team can just go to a player and say, okay, we're going to convert, whatever percentage or whatever millions of dollars of your base salary, give it to you up front, and we're going to lower your base, but this is going to help us. So the player doesn't lose any money in the process.
It's accounting, basically.
Right.
Right.
You're moving, you're kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul, so to speak.
Right.
So with a contract extension, now you're talking something that's a little bit more complex. Do the Giants want Williams for 3 years? Does Williams only want 2 years? So there's all kinds of, little things that have to factor in. And it's not as easy to get this done because you're not talking a restructure, you're talking an extension. So I think that, and I also wonder, how much the injuries are playing into the equivalent. I still think, for the record, Leonard Williams, when healthy, he's a very good player. He can definitely help this team. And I do think they want him, moving forward. But long-term, how would you define long-term for him? 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? Right. That's where the question has to, be answered.
Right. There are two things with Williams that nag at me a little bit. And one, as you said, he was a rock for many, many years in the NFL, never missing time. We've, this past year, for the first time, he missed games. And the reality of it is, when you get to 29, 30, you get to your 8th, 9th year in the NFL, that doesn't get better.
Yeah.
That doesn't get better. There are going to be missed games. There are going to be, what we see right now from Leonard Williams, he's not going to get better as a player. And there's two things that nag at me. And one is, how long is that extension going to be? Because you don't want to be tied to him for 4 more years or whatever. You'd love to add 1, maybe 2 at the most. And the other thing that nags at me is that I've been told that Leonard Williams and his reps are a very difficult negotiation. They want to squeeze every dollar out of everything. And that nags at me, and it just makes me wonder if the Giants will get to a point where they look at this and say, we just can't get to a deal that makes sense, and we need this money, and we don't want to move on, but we just can't get to a deal that makes sense. So moving on from Williams is what they wind up having to do.
And then there's another factor here. Remember, the Giants restructured Williams, I think, twice the last couple of years. So his prorated bonus right now for 2023, $14.26 million. Then in 2024, it's 5.96 million. So if you restructure or extend him and lower that 18 million base salary that he has, now you're going to add on to the prorated bonus. You're talking a hefty amount here. So if you cut Williams and you make him a post June 1st designation, that's an $18 million saving with a $14.26 million cap hit this year and a 5.96 million next year, which they were going to absorb anyway if they left the contract as is, because in 2024 he's got the voidable year. If you make him a pre-June or a standard cut, 12 million, little over 12 million in savings, and then you have a 20.22 million dead money hit. So in this case, if the Giants were to move on from Leonard Williams, a post June 1st cut, I think, would make sense. But I think they would like to have him. I'd be very surprised if he's cut, but certainly I could see a scenario where maybe that could be in the cards. Because look, the Giants have already restructured Darren Waller's contract. I don't know necessarily if they want to have to redo Adoree Jackson's contract. Ideally, I think they'd like to get something done with Dexter Lawrence to lower his number. I know they'd like to get something done with Saquon to lower his number, but where else are you going to get money from? I mean, the Giants, I think last I checked, they had just under $1 million in effective cap space, according to Over the Cap. Now that'll change, obviously, but you need money to sign your draft class. You need money to get you through the year. Where's that money going to come from?
Yeah, absolutely, and so we'll have to follow what happens with Leonard Williams. It's an interesting situation, a little bit of a sticky situation, and you're right. The Giants don't want to lose him. They didn't want to lose James Bradbury a year ago, but sometimes in a salary cap driven league with a hard cap, sometimes things happen simply because of the finances. And Patty, the other player we absolutely have to talk about, you mentioned him a minute ago. We have to talk about Saquon. He's on the $10.1 million franchise tag this year. I think he's one of 3 running backs, Josh Jacobs, and I can't think of the other one who's on the franchise tag.
Pollard.
Pollard, who's on the franchise tag for 2023. We've heard the numbers. We heard that he turned down, a $12.5 million annual value long-term deal a while ago. You heard earlier in the offseason that he wants more than that. The Giants are pretty much dug in on their number. I've begun to wonder 2 things. I've begun to wonder if a long-term deal is ever going to get done. And I've also begun to wonder if, from the Giants' perspective, that $12.5 million is even still on the table. So if it's not, there's no way they get a long-term deal done. But I'm just what's your sense of the Barkley situation?
Well, I don't think the Giants will pull that $12.5 million deal off the table. I think, I had heard that they had gotten as high as 13. Now, that said, I don't think they want to go any higher than that. And you look at what running backs are getting on the open market, and it's not a whole lot.
No, that's why you wonder, because that's a lot of money compared to what everybody else is getting.
Right. Now, $10 million is not bad for Saquon. I mean, all things considered. I mean, what did Miles Sanders get? I want to say he got 9. Did he get 9? He
got less than that. I'd have to look it up, Patty.
I think it was 6. Wasn't it like 54 for 4 or something like that? I think it was, but it was less than that. All right. Now, I'm not comparing and saying that, Saquon is on par with Miles Sanders, 2 different very types of players, but you have a deep running back class.
Miles Sanders, but let me just toss this out quickly. Miles Sanders got 4 years and $25.4 million, so a little bit over $6 million a year.
Okay, so there you go. All right. You have a deep running back class in this draft. Everybody has said this is a deep class for running backs. Saquon doesn't have leverage here. I think, quite honestly, his side overplayed this. You knew the minute that Daniel Jones got done, you knew what was coming. Mm-hmm. And, I don't blame Saquon. I don't blame any player for wanting to get as much as they can, because this is such a small window to maximize your earning, but you also have to read the market, and I don't know if reports of him wanting 16 million, which is what McCaffrey gets a year, I don't know if those are true or not, or 15 million, which Zeke was getting before he was cut. But you got to know the market, and I just feel like his side overplayed their hand a little bit here. The Giants have the leverage, and people always ask me, "Oh, if they don't get a deal done, will Saquon hold out?" He might skip the spring. I could see that. Would he skip training camp maybe in the beginning? But I always go back and I remember how Saquon multiple times said, "Gosh, when I was injured, I missed being out there with my brothers. I missed playing. I missed the game. I loved the game." And I get it, you have a small window to earn, but to have 10 million plus guaranteed, that's not a bad chunk of change. I think I could retire comfortably on that. I mean, I don't know what expenses he has or whatnot, or what his lifestyle's like, but you have to understand the market. And I question whether or not, there's that good understanding of the market.
Well, the other thing, when you say understand the market, I think you also might have said read the room. And if you didn't, then I will say that as well.
Yeah.
Here's the reality. Joe Shane didn't draft Saquon Barkley.
Mm-hmm.
Joe Shane would not have drafted Saquon Barkley at number 2.
Mm-hmm.
No way. No
Yep.
way, because you look at Joe Shane's history, you look at the teams he's worked for. Joe doesn't value a running back that way.
Right.
You're given his choice, Joe would I fully believe that Joe would rather not spend $13 million a year on a running back.
Yeah.
But this is the situation that the Giants are in. And in all honesty, I think that if Saquon pushes, then the Giants are just going to let him play on the tag. And I think if they don't have a deal done by the draft, the earlier the Giants take a running back, that to me, that will tell you a lot about the future of Saquon Barkley with the Giants. Because if they draft a running back, say at 57, in the first 2 rounds, they're telling you that they're planning to move on from Saquon.
Yeah, that's a good point. Definitely. I don't think they'll take a running back in the second round. Maybe, I can see third, fourth round, but your point is well taken.
Mm-hmm. But the earlier they take one,
right,
the more seriously they treat the position in the draft, gives you an indication of Saquon's long-term future. I really believe that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I and let's hope it works out. I mean, Saquon is a wonderful player. He's been a great face of the franchise for them. And again, I understand he wants to get paid what he feels his worth is, but how many of us can sit there and say that we're worth more than what we're actually getting paid? I know I can. I know you probably can. I think everybody on the face of the planet will sit there and say, if you were to ask them and say, what do you think you're worth per year? Our employers would not agree that we're worth that in our pay.
Yeah, I fully understand that sentiment, Patty. And got to ask you about one more player who apparently thinks that he's worth a whole lot more than the market appears willing to pay him these days. And that, of course, is Odell Beckham Jr., who seems to be taking to social media these days and saying that offers for him to play for $4 million a year just aren't enough. And whatever you think of that, whatever you think of Odell, I've told you this before, but I have never really thought that Odell Beckham Jr. was going to return to the Giants, despite all the speculation and all the headlines and all the Giants reported interest and talking to him and going to his workout and all that. I have never thought that Odell Beckham Jr. at this point in his career and this edition of the Giants were a match. I'm just curious if where you stand on the whole Odell thing.
Look, I mean, the Giants had to do due diligence. I don't fault them for inquiring. I don't fault them for having Odell in. I don't fault them for going to the workout. But Odell is coming off his second ACL. And yes, he did the workout and all based on reports, he dazzled on the workout. but he also worked out, if I remember correctly, without a shirt on and without football equipment on, which does kind of change things a little bit because that equipment can add weight and kind of maybe change, how you operate out there. That said, I mean, you talk about reading the room. I can understand Odell wanting, to be paid, but look at what the market's going for receivers. I don't think any receivers in free agency really made like a huge deal. I mean, I think they've been modest. So I don't know exactly what Odell's looking for, but if he's trying to get paid, like the top receiver in the free agency class, I think he needs to maybe take a step back and reevaluate things and just maybe, I don't know, maybe the first year becomes a prove it type deal with incentives as opposed to guaranteed money or, sure things. If you're that convinced that, you're better and you're as good as new, then
Well,
what's the problem with going out there and showing people and
well,
earning?
let me ask you this, Patty. When is the last time Odell Beckham Jr. was better than Paris Campbell, Darius Slayton, or Isaiah Hodgins?
He's been injured.
When's the last time he was better than any of those guys? It was he's been injured. And even if you go back and look at his numbers from Cleveland and all of that, he's not, and this is what I say to people, he is not the Odell Beckham Jr. that Giants fans remember from 2015, 2016, 2017. He is not that player anymore.
Right.
You're not getting that guy, and Odell has to look in the mirror and realize he's not that guy anymore either.
Well, I can understand it. I mean, sometimes you look in the mirror and you say, I'm better than ever before. But ultimately, things do catch up with you. I mean, I'd like to sit here and say that, I got as much energy as I did when I was in my 20s. And, that's not the case, So I understand it, because it's such a small window and you want to cash in on it. You want to capitalize. Odell set goals for himself. He wanted to go down in history as the best receiver ever to play the game. Unfortunately, life got in the way. And at some point, you just got to sit there and say, okay, maybe I won't be the best receiver in the game, but I can work to be the best Odell that I could be.
All right, Patty, last thing for you. Between now and the NFL draft, can you see any more big moves from the Giants? I see supplemental signings.
Yeah.
I don't see a big move. I'm just curious if you see a spot where they might make a big move.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, their cap situation right now, I mean, I looked at over the cap. Over the cap had them at I think it was just under $1 million in cap space, which means they're going to have to open stuff up. So where are they going to fit in a big signing? Unless unless you're talking like a Saquon extension or a Leonard Williams extension, that would be considered big, I guess. But I think, we're entering the second wave of free agency, and I think any signings moving forward are going to reflect that.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think the work right now for the Giants, unless they can make a smaller signing, and A'Shaun Robinson wouldn't be a small signing per se because he's a good player. He's been a good player in the league for a while, but I don't think you're going to see any more huge moves, any more Darren Waller type trades. I think you're right. I think what we're going to see is a lot of contract work. Williams, Barkley, Dexter Lawrence, like you said, anything else that they might want to do, contract wise. I think that's the news that we're going to see, going forward.
Yeah, I agree. They just don't have the money. I mean, you want to get into cap hell again by kicking, the can down the road. I don't think Shane wants to do that if he doesn't have to.
No, he doesn't. And people keep asking me, well, why didn't the Giants just take, why didn't they make Kenny Golladay a post June 1 cut?
Couldn't wait. They needed the money.
They needed the money. Plus, Joe said this at the combine. We'd like to be done with this contract. We'd like to take our medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And it was going to cost them the same amount of money over the 2 years either way. It was just a matter of whether, for accounting purposes, were they going to do half of it this year and half of it next year, and kick $6.8 million into next year. And they just chose to take the hit now.
Yeah.
And that's fine, because you keep kicking the money down the road, and sooner or later that catches up with you too.
Absolutely. So I don't fault them for it. I mean, yes, it would have been nice to have the 13+ million, but that money wouldn't have been available to them until June 1st anyway.
Right.
They got stuff they got to get done now. So, down the line, you redo, maybe you get Dexter extended, or you do something with Leo, or, I don't know. This is
you could do something with McKinney if you really wanted to at some
well, I
point
would
too,
wait on
if
McKinney.
you
I'd
feel
wait
good
to see
about
how
him
his
going
hand-
forward.
I would wait to see how his hand comes through, but you can do something down the line. I don't think you have to rush right now. I mean, the priority is obviously filling in whatever else they need, and that's why I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of more, other than maybe veteran minimum type deals or smaller signings.
Right. Right. All right. I think, Patty, that's a good place for us to wrap it up. Thank you as always. I wanted to, let folks know if you've got anything special coming up here over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing draft previews over on Giants Country, as well as we'll have analysis and some other stuff. I've got a couple of cap items that I'm going to work on. Hopefully, if we have some quiet time this week, like last week. And then on the Locked On Giants podcast, I've got some really cool guests lined up for the week. We'll hear about Jeff Smith, receiver that I don't think a lot of people know about. So I'm going to have Locked On Jets host John Butchko come on, and he's going to talk about that. I'm going to have I've got a former NFL player coming on. So I've got a whole bunch of stuff coming on with the Locked On Giants podcast, which is available on YouTube as well as any place you get your podcasts.
Cool. All right, Patty, thanks again. And Giants fans, thank you as always for listening. Please remember to stay safe out there, take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.